Welcome back to the Old History Project YouTube channel. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please see the description below for links to my Facebook page and podcast. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a pretty interesting one. It showcases one Hal Noe, who was born in 1896, talking about Hamblen County history to a class of Jim Claborn students. Now this video comes from the collection of Jim Claborn, who gave me explicit permission to upload this video. So if you see yourself in the video later on, please put the timestamp where you are. Also, if you've made it this far, please like, share, and subscribe, as every like, share, and subscribe counts. Also, while you're here, please consider joining the East Tennessee Historical Society. You can get more details on their membership and how to join on their website. Thanks for watching and enjoy.
Talked to you this morning about Morristown and the Civil War. And I think he's taking a big chance and asking me to do that because he's never heard me on the subject. Some of you, maybe all of you, know more as much about this subject as I do. During the last few days, I've been kind of grown up, learned little I didn't know, and I hope I have learned some things that I can tell you, some things that you didn't know. You know, there's an old saying, a man who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. But the man who knows and knows that he knows not is a wise man. I don't claim to be a wise man. I hope I'm not fooling you. I want to thank Bob Rue right here for the efficient help he's given me in preparing this little talk. He's a librarian at the Morristown Hamblen Library. And that's a wonderful place. If you don't take advantage of that, facilities there, you certainly make a mistake. But before we talk about the Civil War, I want to go back and tell you a little about the early history of Morristown. You'd like to hear that, wouldn't you? Well, the land on which Morristown is now situated, including this school building, at different times has been claimed by the Spanish, the French, the British, the colony of North Carolina, the state of North Carolina, the state of Franklin, later became their territory south of the Ohio River, and then admitted into the Union of the state of Tennessee in 1796. The first settlers in this region of Morristown, of which we have any record, were Robert McFarland and Alexander Outlaw, who settled out on the bend of the Chutney River about 3.5 miles beyond the present Indian Plain. Alexander Outlaw had a daughter who married Joseph Hamilton, who was a county court clerk in Dandridge in Jefferson County. There's no Hamilton County there anymore then. Alexander Hamilton built a house he called Rural Mountain, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles beyond the Indian Plain. That house still stands. It's the oldest house in Hamblen County, and it's in bad state of repair. And I certainly hope that the new formed Morristown or Hamblen County Historical Society will take the restoration of that old house as its project. The three Marshes came here: Gideon, Absalom, and Daniel Marsh, and that's the family after which Morristown's named. They came here about 1787. They took grants of land on what became the site of Morristown, as is shown by later deeds. On September the 20th, 1787, grants were made to Ed and Jesse Riggs and Gideon Morris. The Riggs brothers came to this section about the same time that the three Morris brothers did. They took grants of land here, and later they sold that land to John Morris, the son of Gideon Morris, who owned at that time all the land extending from Haven Springs. If you've ever been to the filtration plant over here, you know where that is. The land extends from the filtration plant there now over to behind to the school that's on over here on Lincoln Avenue. They call that then Davis Mountain. We know it as Fresh Air Hill. These first settlers were Scotch Irish. They were Scotch Highlanders. They were German. No road through here had been laid out at that time. How they got there, how they selected this site, I can't understand. But it was not until 1792 and 3 that a road through this area was surveyed and laid out, connecting the road, stage road, leading from Athens, Virginia to Knoxville, Tennessee. That stage road, later it became the dividing line between Jefferson and Hamblen counties, and it's now Morristown Main Street. That's the reason it's so curvy. When Jefferson and the Granger counties were formed, everybody who lived on the north side of what's called the Big Road lived in Granger County. This was in Granger County. All on the south side of that lived in Jefferson County. The early settlers along this new stage route included William Cheney, Thomas Daggett, Isaac Martin, Phelps Reed, Richard Thompson, John Crockett, and others. You all know who John Crockett was. He was the father of David. John Crockett built a store-and-a-half log house up near where the Crockett Museum is. And it was later burned because after the Civil War, because it was used as a pest house during the Civil War, and they wanted to burn it to kill all. Right. He knew he couldn't go back to school, he'd be whipped, and knew he couldn't go home for the same reason, so he and the sheep boy took off on a cattle drive. And he finally ended up in Baltimore. David was gone about 2.5 years, and when he returned home, it was dark. The people were sitting at the table eating supper, and he went in, and nobody recognized him until he'd been there a few minutes at the table. Finally, his sister recognized him. In his autobiography, David said this about his home in Morristown. He said, a place of hard times and plenty of them. The school at Barton Springs that he attended was later called his one that ran only a few years was closed. Gideon Marsh had 3 sons. They all settled there here. John Gideon Jr. and Shattuck. 2 other men, John Crow and John Bull, were early settlers here. They came here shortly after the Morrises, owning land that was Morristown's present 4th Ward, where you East High School here. Greene County was one of the first 3 counties formed in Tennessee, and some of these early deeds were perhaps in that county, not in Jefferson County. In the early deeds of Creek, we know that Turkey Creek was called Cook Creek, and sometimes it was called Sweetens Creek in the early deeds. Now going back to the Morris family. John Morris' home was located on what you know as South Covenant Street. If you know where the South Covenant Fire Station is, that's where the Morris home was. Just across Common Street on that little hill is the old Morris Cemetery, in which Morristown's first settlers were buried. We'll touch on that just in a few minutes. John Bull, who came here shortly after the Morrises, he built a 2-story log house on the lot opposite what's now Stetcher's funeral home. A daughter of John Bull married William Cheney, and the Cheneys conducted a stop there for stagecoach for many years until that building was torn down in 1856 when Dr. Michael McCaggart came here from Tazewell. He tore that down and built a 2-story brick house which later became the Cap's house. John Bull, he had his son Elisha Bull. He was a famous gunsmith. He left Morristown and settled up in the town that later was named for him, Bull's Gap. We're going to have to leave out a lot of this because we won't have time, Jim, for all of this. Morristown was incorporated in 1855 through an order from the Greenwich County Court. The election was held right after that, and J.W. Shelton was elected Morristown's first mayor. And the aldermen, now listen to these names. These names are all the first settlers of Morristown. The aldermen were Drury Morris, Russell Riggs, J.B. Moore, N.F. Reed, and S.L. Huffmaster. Uncle Wilson Witt, whom I've talked to several times. He lived to be 102 years old, back in 12 days, and he died in 1919. He remembers in all the land between Cumberland Street and going east, coming this way, was solid woodland with no trails at all through it. And there's only 3 houses in Morristown. They were the houses of the Cheneys, the Morrises, and Martin Stubblefield. The first store was built here in 1833, and the first post office in Morristown was in this store owned by John Coffin in 1833. John Coffin built his storehouse on West Main Street about where the Hamblen County Library is. That building burned several years later, and the post office then moved to what we call the Brown Stubblefield building, which is located on the corner where Parks Belts building is now. First postmaster here was Joe Brown. The Brown family and the Crow family moved to Morristown in 1869 after the Civil War, and they bought property in town. They bought the Cap's house, and they also bought the old storehouse on the corner where Parks Belt is, tore it down and built a new building here. Not the building that's there now, no. The building that's there now was only built in 1905. Our courthouse, some of you know, was built in 1874 after Hamblen County was formed. You know there was a fight between what would become the county seat of Hamblen County, Morristown and Russellville. Before the railroad came through here in 1855, Russellville was the most important trading center, more important than Morristown. In fact, when the railroad was built through here, Morristown was such a small, insignificant place, the railroad company refused to lay a sidetrack. But subscription was taken up and the sidetracks were down. In the 1833, when Morristown had its first post office. There wasn't many here at that, not much here at that time. Morristown was a very small village. It had one store, blacksmith shop, and a few dwellings. Of course, all houses were logged at that time. John B. Jackson came to Morristown in 1838. He built a storehouse on what's now West Main Street, across from Preston Baptist Church. His house was on the same location as Baptist Church, First Baptist Church is on now. And Jackson Street there is named after David Jackson. Now we'll mention a little about the schools. You're interested in the schools. And to begin with, I want to extend congratulations to Amy Roberts, 14, an 8th grader at this school. Is that right, you?
Amy Roberts. You got it, yes, sir.
No, I'm wrong. It's the Westview Middle School.
Have you got it? I thought you had it in
Hamblen County.
Okay.
42nd Southern Appalachian Spelling Bee, Saturday, and we represent the area of Tennessee and the Nashville Bee to held in Washington, June.
We've got the runner-up here in this school. That's who we've got, Laura Burke.
Congratulations to the runner-up. There are no records of any schools taught in the village of Morristown from the first settlement until approximately 1845, when Professor S.D. Miles taught at school in the old Bethel Church. One-story log building is set down just across the highway from where your health center is. You know where that is, on North Company Street. That old log building later became the First Baptist Church here. Later in 1845, the academy was built. That was called the Morristown Female Academy. It was a two-story building built on the lot where Rose Center is. That was Rose School, the only school building in Morristown when I started the school here. Later they built the Roberts School the year after that. Now, following Miles, we had Professor Hodges, Southern, and Book, all teaching in that old female academy. I'll tell you what to study. Here's what they had in the first department: orthography, reading, writing, oral arithmetic. Do you know what orthography is? Nobody know what orthography is? Well, orthography is merely placing the letters in the proper sequence when you spell a word. In other words, it's just spelling. Why they didn't say spelling, I don't know, but they got it orthography. That's the first department. Now the second department was written arithmetic, geography, and English grammar. In the third department, we had natural, mental, and moral philosophy.
What grade was this in, Mr. Noe? What grade was this in?
This was in 8th grade.
Is that right?
Didn't have a high school. In the third department, they had natural, mental, and moral philosophy, political economy, philosophy, and navigation. Why that, huh? Together with the Latin language and other sciences taught in our college. They had a difficult course, didn't they? Let's see what else we got here. We have to do out a lot of these things. It had been the dream of Morristown citizens as early as 1839 to procure a railroad here. So the charter was granted in 1858 that the railroad was built through Morristown. When the railroad first came through here, they had a big celebration over in the field near where our passenger station is. They had a bonfire, and of course they had a lot of other things in jugs. We had all that. We'll have to eliminate some more of this, Jim. The Virginia Hotel, that was one of the well-known places in Morristown before and right after the Civil War. It was built, the old original Virginia Hotel stood on the lot where the Kingmeyer Hotel stands now. It was built before the war by Jack Noe, no relation of mine. In 1887 and 1899, additions were added to it, and J.S. Crump came here and operated facility there. It was burned in 1911. The King Mitchell Hotel, called the Kingmeyer, was built on the same spot in 1921. They had another famous hotel here. They called the Cane House. It stood on South Hampton Street, just across the railroad, on what I guess the Plaza Downtown Shopping Center now occupied most of that lot. It was burned in 1895. Well, the graded school system here in Morristown was started in 1888. Before that, they all went together, one big room. The Morristown High School, that's Rose Center. It was Morristown High School when it was first built, and then the name Rose School and then Rose Center. It was the first school building, the only school building here when I started the school. It was built in 1892. The Roberts School we called the East End School. It was built in 1902. The Sherwood School in 1921. The Carriger School in 1915, President High School in Florida East High in 1924. The first telephones here were in 1890. Lived all that many years without a telephone. During the last decade, 10 years prior to the Civil War, a number of prominent men with their families came into Morristown. Morristown was one of the buildings at that time. The census was taken in 1860, just a year before the Civil War started. The population of Morristown at that time was 500. Again, we're going to have to eliminate it. The beginning of the Civil War, that's the thing I'm supposed to be mostly about. The beginning of the Civil War paralyzed all business, and the phenomenal growth and prosperity of the decade preceding the war was at an end. Almost all of the able-bodied men joined the Army. Those of Southern sympathies who were not in the service were compelled to leave Morristown. As the war progressed on account of the bushwhackers, there being at one time only 5 or 6 men in Morristown. Although East Tennessee furnished a large quota of the Union Army, Morristown was largely Southern. There's one young man who lived near Russell. He refused to be drafted into the service. He spent the entire time in the Civil War living in his attic. There were 3 companies for the Army of the Confederacy made up in Morristown, Alderstown, and the nearby areas. These companies were under the command of Captain Stephen Cox, Captain F.M. Jackson, and Captain J.C. Hardy. Captain Cox was the brother-in-law of Judge Turley, who built one of the earlier houses in Morristown, and the house in which the cannonball was found when it was torn down for the building of the White Store Center, and the cannonball you can now see in the David Crockett Museum. That was Captain Cox's company. Company C of the 37th Tennessee. The company came from Morristown for a while, after which they joined the 37th Regiment in Knoxville and moved to Germantown, West Tennessee, and participated in the war in Mississippi. Captain Cox didn't have his quota. He got a band, and he got a few of his men together. He started on West Main Street, about where the utility building is, and he marched down East Main Street with the men yelling and the band playing and calling for volunteers. By the time he got to the top of the hill on East Main Street, there where Stetson Funeral Home is now, he had his quota of men. I looked over the roster of those men, Jim. I found they had 188 men in that company. I saw many in there, several I say, who were ages 18 and 19. But the remarkable thing to me when I went over the roster was that there were 7 in there who were only 16 years of age. How many here are 16 years? None? Are these younger than 16 years?
You got a couple 15 and some 14.
Well, there were some 15s and 14. Those boys were Henry Fagg, J.A. Wood, Captain Kirk, George, E.W. Skinny, Frank Smith. And when I saw that brought to memory of mine, most of my memory of a poem, a well-known poem that was written just at the end of the Civil War. This was about a little boy called Chip Giffen of Tennessee. Do you know the poems? Well, this poem is said, and all the details in it are in fact. During the war, the wife of a physician who lived near Columbus, Georgia, always visited the places where the wounded and the sick were taken during the war. She went into this old building being used as a temporary hospital. She saw this young boy there. He was evidently a victim of gangrene. He was emaciated, near the skeleton. She asked the doctor about him. The doctor said there's no chance for him. He only can have death, the only thing he can have. So this lady, Mrs. Tickner, who lived not far away, she asked the doctor, can I take him home with me? So she lifted this little emaciated boy and she took him out to her home, out in the county. The home was on a large estate. There she doctored the boy. She helped him along. He couldn't read or write. He didn't know who he was. The only thing he knew about himself was, my father was a blacksmith in East Tennessee Mountains. That's all they ever knew about him. At that time, he was only 16 years of age. But at that time, 16 years of age, listen to this. He had already engaged in 18 battles and skirmishes. She took him home. She She treated him, brought him back to health, first walking on crutches and canes, and then in March of '65, General Johnson was in trouble. He knew about it and he heard about it. So he left. He says, I'm leaving. I'm going to join my company. They need me. Whatever happened to him, where he was killed, where he was buried, no one knows. But this lady, Miss Tickler, who took him and nursed him back to health, wrote a little poem. I'd like to read it, Jim. You may have heard it. Out of the focal and foremost fire, out of the hospital walls, that's dire, grape shot and gangrene, 18 battles and heat 16. Spectre, such as you seldom see, little given of Tennessee. Take him and welcome, the surgeon said. Little the doctor can help the dead. So he took him and brought him where the bomb was swooping in the summer air, and we laid him down on a Holston bed, other ladders, heel to head. And we watched the war with the bated breath, the skeleton boy against skeleton death. Months of torture, how many such, weary weeks of stick in the crutch. And still he glint of the steel blue eye told of the spirit that would not die, and didn't, nay more, in death's despite the crippled skeleton learned to write. Dear mother at first, of course, and then dear captain, inquiring about the man. Captain's answer was, of 80 and 5, Giffen and I are left to lie. Words of gloom from the war one day, Johnson would say, little Giffen was up and away. A tear, his first, as he bade goodbye, dimmed the glint of his steel blue eye. I'll write, it's better. There are news in the fight. Young Giffen, he did not write. I sometimes fancy that were I king of the Prince of Knights of the Golden Ring, with the song of the minstrel in mine ear and the tender legend that trembles here, I'll give the best on his bended knee to quiet the soul of my chivalry, or little Giffen, Tennessee. You know, opposite this page in this war history by Henry Steele Commentary, I find this. General Charles King researched on the number of boys in the Civil War, and he found that over 1,800,000 lads of 17 or less were found in the ranks of the Union Army, and that over 200,000 were no more than 16. And that were even 100,000 on the Union road who were no more than 15, some 14. The beginning of the Civil War paralyzed all business, as I just said. Now we'll go back to the organization of the companies here in Morristown. That is Captain Cox's company. Captain Frank Jackson's company, Company G of the 61st Tennessee Infantry, under Colonel James G. Rose. We'll have more about him later. He's the man, Jim, that Rose School's named after. It was organized here, was in sole service in and near Morristown, which, with other companies, succeeded in driving the Federals, that's killed, forces from this section. Company C also saw service in Mississippi. A number were killed and wounded, taken prisoners at Big Black River, Mississippi. Also several in the siege of Vicksburg. J.C. Graves, I talked to him several times. He's the last surviving Confederate veteran that died in 1937.
And you talked to him a number of times, did you say?
Yes, I did. He belonged to Captain Jackson's company. Was on a scouting expedition near the mouth of the Notichucky River, and that's where Chucky River, we call it Notichucky, confluences with the French Broad of Dublin for Indian artifacts right at that very spot. He was captured and was taken to Camp Chase prison, that right out of Washington. And there he remained for about a year. I looked over the roster of that company, it contained 101 men. None was listed at 16 years old, but several were 18 and 19. The other company made up in Morristown was Company 8 of the 50th Tennessee, Captain J.C. Hodges in command, which also served in Mississippi. Captain Hodges was captured at Big Black River. Most of the officers of the regiment were sent to Johnson's Island prison, where they remained for 20 months. There were 70 men in that company, none 16 or 17 years of age. And there were several Morristown citizens who joined other companies during the Civil War. In addition to these three companies, there were James P. Taggart, who joined Captain McCall's Engineering Corps. He later became Thompson Hall, a businessman here in Morristown. W.G. Taylor, the farmer who lived out to the yard, what is now joining the 7th grade, he joined the 37th. John Houston joined Company B of the 3rd Tennessee, I know not him. T.J. Speck joined Arms Battery, he laid Virginia, well-known dentist here in Morristown. Luther Ledbetter, he was the farmer of Lowtown, he joined the Sappers Miners, and James A. Carter joined the 59th Tennessee. He's the man that gave the land for the city cemetery. Now the Morlock family, who live just beyond where you are now, they furnished 9 sons to the Confederacy. They were Jonathan, Ellie, Joseph, Nathan, W.L., Jake, James, A.J., and David Morlock. They all returned. Just before the Civil War, the widow Russell came to Morristown in 3 wagons with her family. And she had 8 sons. And all 8 of those sons joined the Confederate service. They were John, James, Robert, George, William, Joseph, David, and Monroe. All of them lived to return to Morristown, and the Russell family became the prominent family here. Now, just to show you the faith that those Confederate soldiers had in their cause. Some of them knew they were evidently even listening to the lost cause. But just to show you the faith, they did have. I want to read you a letter or two. I have 4. You don't read them all. Written back here in Morristown, men in the service, to show you how true they were to the cause. It says there, this is written from Cumberland Gap, July 1861, and it says, I apprehend no difficulty here until after the federal Congress shall pass upon the matter. They will either take steps to make a more vigorous prosecution of the war, or acknowledge our independence, and I think the latter policy will attain. Lincoln already has a powerful army in Virginia, Indiana, and Missouri, and expenses must soon bankrupt the government. And when hard fighting is to be done, a second thought of the consequences may prevail. At all events, we will conquer. There we will have then we will have one of the proudest in the known world. We have all the crossings guarded, and in a few days can whip any force they can bring against us. I went upon the mountain to the peak, that's over on Clinch Mountain, to the peak and spent the day picking huckleberries, feasting my eyes upon the beautiful scenery of the surrounding counties. Up here, we're proudly post the Confederate flag given to the Morristown boys. And here's another one. This dated came near Vicksburg, Mississippi, 1863. 2 Morristown companies organized here participated in that battle. This man says, since I wrote to you last, the Yankees landed 60,000 soldiers in Fort Gibson below Vicksburg. On Thursday, our boys met in a grand shove 30 miles below here and engaged them. Our brigade has not been engaged yet. I think the main flight will come off Friday. We have been trying to get the Yankees to follow us into our breastworks ever since we have been here. And I think we'll make the trip this time. Don't pay any attention to anything you hear and read in the papers. We didn't have many are here. But look on the bright side, and we'll end the war, we feel sure. This is probably the name of John Allen, his wife in Morristown. And he was later captured. He belonged to Captain Frank Jackson's company. He was captured there at Vicksburg. He was carried to one lookout prison near Chattanooga, and he died there. Throughout the war, Morristown was alternately held by the contending armies. General Schofield, after the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army, had his headquarters here, as did General Stoney. General John C. Breckinridge, former Vice President of the United States and active general in the Confederate Army, also had headquarters here at Morristown at one time. Old Bethel Church was used as a hospital, and the uncompleted Methodist Church was used as disabled by the Union forces. That's now where the First United Methodist Church stands. The years of war brought many withers and suffering to the withers and children of the Confederate soldiers. They felt the lack of the necessities of life. And in December 1862, a petition to raise money for their benefit was circulated. The name they receiving in the distributing committee composed of Jonathan Noe, John Fulton, W.S. Rhodes, and C.E. Carter. I have a list here of individual contributors. We won't read those, but the sum amounts to $550. I'd like to have been there, Jim. I certainly would give them what I could to it. Now here's something right interesting. During the winter of 1863, the boy battery, Army of Northern Virginia, raised in Richmond, was on outpost duty near Morristown. A writer to the Confederate veterans, W.M. Evans, said of them this, and I read, of course, nothing could be more natural than that the Virginia boys should hunt up pretty girls. That seemed to be large numbers in Morristown. Our stay was all too short, but I think the following lines, which have never forgotten, was given to me by one of the sweet Morristown, Tennessee girls who showed that very little time was lost in the wooing. And here's the point. It is hard for humans to sleep in camp. It is hard for humans to fight. It is hard for humans through snow to tramp and snow to sleep at night. It's harder for winds from humans to part, since humans have stolen wind's heart. In October 1864, the Battle of Morristown was fought on the 28th day. It's been described as follows by a writer in the Morristown Gazette. It was a beautiful autumn day, such as rarely seen except in this lovely hill country. General Vaughan had 2 skeleton cavalry brigades, commanded by Colonel James Carter and Colonel W.M. Bradford, and he also had a battery of light artillery. General Gilham's opposing army was perhaps twice as strong in America. The battle was fought in the early afternoon, and the conflict raged to a large extent up and down what was now the main street of Morristown. The spirited duel was carried on for some time with a rival battery posted on elevated points. Shot and shell plunged the street over and through the streets of the village. The federal battery was located here where the city cemetery is. Which way do I point to the city cemetery?
So it'd be that way.
Yeah, well, it was located on the hill where the city cemetery is, and the Confederate battery was located on the hill just behind the schoolhouse, over on Lincoln Avenue. And one of those shots went in the home, Old Turley home, that later became the O.C. King home. That's where I told you a while ago they tore it down and found the ball that was down there.
That cannonball. We're going to be having some more people come in here to be with us. Now, if some of y'all don't know this man in front of you here, it's a fella that I used to see when I first started working here in Morristown about 22 years ago. I was 9 years old and selling newspapers. I go down to the Daily Gazette Mail, and I see this man in the window at the desk, and I see you come back quite a lot downtown there to see him. And I just thought that it took a man that knowed a lot of knowledge to sit behind that desk and write for a newspaper. This fellow right here is Mr. Hal Noe. He was sitting where you were sitting in 1908. He was over here at Rose School and what you call now junior high in 1908. And he knows just a tremendous amount of material about Morristown when it was first settled. He's been a friend of mine for about a year now, and every time I see him, I just like to try to know more and more about him. So I think that we're especially lucky. If any of you people are interested in the history of this area, we're especially lucky to have this man in here to talk to us about it. Now, what he's going to be talking to us about this period will be Morristown during the Civil War. Now, while he's getting ready, he's going to be mentioning a battle in Morristown. This cannonball was from the battle he's going to be talking about. It was found over near West High School. A fellow that was in junior high over at Lincoln Heights, when I was teaching over at Lincoln Heights, run over this with his lawnmower. 12-pound cannonball. Mr. Noe is going to be talking about the battle that this cannonball was found in, and whatever else comes behind. So we would appreciate it if you give your very best attention to it. Thank you.
Well, it's a new group. Which class are we going to be in, Jim? We've got to roll one of these classes. Which one do you want us to roll in?
We're going to roll both of them.
Roll both of them?
Oh, wait a minute. We've got some more people coming in here. And we got everybody on television. Oops, excuse me, I thought I was stepping on the carpet down there.
You can tell where I'm at, not to look at the hair on, all that hair on my head.
Yeah,
I have trouble getting out of my eyes.
Mr. Noe's got to go to the barber shop when he gets off here.
Absolutely.
So we're going to have to... By the way, people, when you guys are, I'm not going to say as old as Mr. Kaler, but when you're walking around with your own babies and maybe have your own kids over here, you can see this film and come back and see what you looked like when you were an age.
I'm sorry you missed the first part. I told something about the early history of Morristown. I can't repeat that. Well, we're now in the period of the Civil War, 1861. The beginning of the Civil War paralyzed all business, Morristown and everywhere, and the phenomenal growth and prosperity of the decade preceding the war was at an end. Almost all the able-bodied men were joined. Those who were not in the service were compelled to leave Morristown as the war progressed on account of the bushwhackers. There being at one time only 5 or 6 men in the town of Morristown. East Tennessee furnished a large quota for the Union Army. There were three Union companies Jim organized here. And it was this Morristown, this immediate area was largely pro-Southern. There are 3 companies for the Army of the Confederacy made up of Morristown, composed of citizens of Morristown and the surrounding country. These companies were under the command of Captain Stephen Copp, Captain F.M. Jackson, and Captain J.C. Hodges. Captain Copp was a brother-in-law of one of Morristown's early citizens, Judge Turley. He lived on the corner of Henry 2nd South Street where the lumberyard is. The organization of Captain Copp's company was somewhat spectacular. The captain, with a few men in a brass band, started on a line of march at the Mars Store building, which was across the street from where the Baptist church is, with the band playing and the men yelling. They marched across Main Street to the hill, top of the hill, near where the Stitch Funeral Home is. By the time he got there, he had the company. That's Company C of the 37th Tennessee. And after a while, they were left to Knoxville, and they removed to Germantown in West Tennessee. They spent a month in training, and then they engaged in the battle in Vicksburg, Mississippi. I went over the roster of that company one at a time. I found it had 181 men, several in there who were 18 and 19 years of age. But the remarkable thing, and the thing that impressed me most was that there were 7 enlisted in that company who were only 16 years of age. They were Henry Fagg, J.A. Woolley, Captain Kevin Kirk, George and G.W. King Campbell. The second company organized here was commanded by Captain Frank M. Jackson. It composed of 6 Tennessee infantry under Colonel James D. Rowland. He was captain during the war. It was organized there and saw service in and near Morristown, helped them drive Gillum out of here. He also saw service in Mississippi. Captain J.C. Graves, who was the last Confederate soldier to die in Morristown. He died in 1935. I talked to Colonel Graves, Mr. Graves, several times. He was on a scouting expedition near the mouth of the North Chucky River, that's over near Rankin. He was captured and was taken to Camp Chase prison. He remained there for about a year. I went over the roster of that company. There were 103 men in it, but none listened at 16 years old, although there were several who were 18 and 19. The other company made up in Morristown for the Confederacy was Company H of the 50th Tennessee with Captain J.C. Hodges in command, which also saw service in Mississippi. Got my page across up here. Well, no service in Mississippi anyway. Throughout the war, Morristown, the town of Morristown, which was small, you know, at the time of the Civil War, there were about 500 people here. This town was alternately held by the contending armies. General Schofield, after Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, had his headquarters here, as did General Stoneman, the famous North Carolina Raider. General John C. Breckinridge, he was former Vice President of the United States. And after he was General in the Confederate Army, he had his headquarters here at one time. The old Bethel Church, which was used as a hospital, that stood on North Common Street across from the health center there. And the Methodist Church was stood on the corner where the United Methodist Church is now, was used by the Union forces as a stable. During the winter of 1863, the Boy Battery, made up of teenagers, of the Army of Northern Virginia, Confederate Army, of course, raised in Richmond, they were on outpost duty near Morristown. And a writer to a Confederate veteran, W.M. Evans, said this of them. He says, of course, nothing could be more natural than that the Virginia boys should hunt up the pretty girls that seemed to be in large numbers in Morristown. And several here this morning, Jim.
This one here goes to your church back here. This one right back here goes to your church.
Good for her. Our stay, this man says, was all too short. But I think the following lines, which I have never forgotten, given to us by one of the sweet Morristown, Tennessee girls, show that very little time is lost in the woman. And here's the poem. It's hard for Ewans to sleep in camp. It's hard for Ewans to fight. It's hard for Ewans throughout snow to tramp and snow to sleep at night. It's harder for Williams from Ewans to part, since Ewans has stolen Williams' heart. But in October 1864, the Battle of Morristown was fought on the 28th day. It has been described by one writer in this way. It was a beautiful autumn day, such as is rare to see except in this lovely hill country. General Vaughan had two skeleton cavalry brigades commanded by Colonel James Carter and Colonel W.M. Bradford, and the battery of light artillery. General Gillen's opposing army was perhaps twice as strong as American. The battle was fought in the early forenoon up and down the main street, and the conflict raged to a large extent in the very streets of town. The spirited duel was carried on for some time by the rival battery, posted on elevated points, and shot and shell plunged and shrieked over and through the street. I tell this group that the federal battery was stationed over there where the Morristown City Cemetery is in Boston. Well, that's where they were. The Confederate battery was on what was known as Bays Mountain. We call it Freshire Hill. That's the hill just behind the school over on Lincoln Avenue. And of course the shots went back and forth across the town. The Federals followed the Confederates a few miles east of Morristown, then returned and reoccupied their old lines west of the town, between Morristown and Panther Springs. Among the killed was the gallant Captain Ed Gammon, whose father was a storekeeper here. He commanded a company of cavalry, and he fell into charge at the head of his troop. Among the captives was the late Judge James E. Rose of Morristown, who was a lieutenant colonel of a cavalry regiment. Rose School, Rose now Rose Center, was named after Judge Rose, who became a prominent lawyer here, a businessman, and was later a member of the state Supreme Court. Two houses in Morristown bore the marks of those cannonballs fired during the battle. The Judge Taylor of the OCQ battle, which is located where the White Store Center is, they found a cannonball in there when they tore it down. That cannonball is now dig across the center. The other was the old Bethel Church I just told you about, stood on North Common Street. General Vaughan, after his repulse, was superseded by General John Breckinridge, who at once took command, reorganized the Confederate Army, and inspired into it much of his own lost his chivalric spirit, dogged determination, and soon took the offensive. In a few weeks thereafter, he completely turned the tables on General Gillen, overpowered his army, and drove him into confusion from the same ground in which the Battle of Morristown had been fought. Gillen retreated west of Morristown and later went across the Cumberland Gap. Much has been written about Gillen's account of Stampede, which was the Battle of Morristown. But here's something that's quoted from a letter by Mr. Camp of Atlanta to Mr. Graves of this Morristown. It was a while now on November 12, 1864, in company with 100 scouts. We found that the Federals would evacuate Rose Gap that night, and in response to the information, General Breckinridge started at sunset. At about 10 o'clock, we found the Federals moving, and he arrived there. They made a stand behind the stone wall east of Morristown and started volley. Now there's a stone wall located Jim up where the old Barton Spring is.
Still standing there?
No, I don't think it is. We immediately flanked up a little hill. See the hill there where the house was built. To the right, so as to reach them beyond the stone wall. And with a lively exchange of shots, the stampede was on, good and proper. We drove them until sunup the next morning. Morristown, we captured some artillery, 83 wagons, 12 ambulances, and 5 ladies who were officers' wives. I was with the troop party that escorted the ladies to their husbands. A week later, one of the ladies told her husband that the Rebs were fine gentlemen and treated them nicely at Morristown. Judge John B. Shields, who was a lieutenant in 39th Tennessee and was the father of the man who later became the senator, John K. Shields, and lived over near Tate Springs. He wrote about this battle in Morristown. This was his former home. And here's what he said about it. We pursued the Federals as far as Strawberry Plains, capturing 300 prisoners. We thus cleared upper East Tennessee of all Federal troops, they going to Knoxville. They did for a time, yes. Our brigade then fell back to Sullivan County and went into camp for some time. We did a great deal of scouting as bushwhackers were doing considerable distance all over East Tennessee. In March 1865, or about April 1st, we went to Whistle, Virginia, and were in camp there when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Appomattox. We then went to Abbeville, South Carolina, where we guarded the specie of the Confederate treasure. I didn't know they had in Jim anything but Confederate money, paper money. I have a frame here of Confederate paper money that my grandmother left. I didn't think they had any species, native species. Yeah, I've never saw it.
I was thinking they had some
Might have had.
bullion.
Well, anyway, we guarded that until it was loaded in the wagons and taken to Georgia. Some of it was distributed to each member of the escort. The 56th Tennessee and the 31st Tennessee, there were some Morristown men in both of those, were with the brigade that furnished the aforementioned escort. After the surrender, the Confederate soldiers of Morristown, sad, weary, and worn, returned to their desolated homes and country. The dreams they had fondly proud and independent governments had ended, although they brought with them a little scrap of paper on which were written the words, "The bearer, a paroled prisoner of whoever paroled it, has permission to return to his home and there remain unmolested." What did they return to? Have nothing to return to again. All the stock was gone, the crops were gone, many of the houses were burned. One of the most band of roughs. I've heard my grandmother tell about these, and then I've got something about it here out of her diary. Took advantage of the unsettled condition of the country to wreak vengeance and personal grievances. One of the most notorious of these lawless bands was known as the Sizemore Band, who were guilty of many atrocities in this section. One of these was the killing of J.M. Mills as he stood in the center of his home, in the door of his home in East Morristown. I've heard 2 accounts of that. Mr. Mills was standing in the door of his store. His store was on Main Street in a small wooden building where the L.W. Cafe is. Now the home he lived in was on up, that was formerly a service station there, just beyond the parking lot, and the law office in there now. His residence was there. One account says he was shot while standing in the door of his home. I don't know. Some of the Confederate soldiers were too proud to take the oath of allegiance and were forced to refugee in other states. For some years after the close of the war, there were only 10 or 15 men in Morristown permitted to vote. The remaining ones being disfranchised for their southern sympathy. However, in the course of a few years, the indomitable spirit of the Southerners was again manifested. Plans began for the reestablishment of business and the building of a new Morristown, where the old regime had ended forever. I have here on the stand a copy of my grandmother's diary. My grandmother taught a school, Jim. It was a tuition school. There were no free schools then. She taught a tuition school down near Panther Springs, and she kept a diary from 1859 to 1869. I have a copy here of that diary, and she tells a lot about the movement of the soldiers through this section. They say the state archivist said this was absolutely the best record kept of the Civil War during this period. Now, I mentioned Colonel Graves. I've talked to him several times, and you know he's the last Confederate veteran to die here, and he died on September 3rd, 1937. Mr. Graves could relate many entertaining stories about his war service. He said that after the Battle of Knoxville, The attack on Fort Sanders in November 1963, many of General Longstreet's soldiers went to winter in Morristown. That the entire area we know is up in terrace. And beyond was completely denuded of trees by the soldiers who built their little cabins in which to spend the winter. Of course, also using part of it for firewood to cook if they got anything to cook. He said the occupation spread panic among the people in the Morristown area. Everyone made efforts to hide their food in the valleys. They dug holes in the ground, buried it in the ground, put brush over it. They hid it in caves. Barns and bins were broken into, everything taken. In many instances, despite orders to the contrary. Now, General Longstreet came up here and he had his headquarters in Russell. The house is still standing. There, Jim, it's at the crossroads right in the heart of Russell. And while he was there, he issued an order to his soldiers about foraging, take the people things that couldn't afford it. And this is a copy of that official order. It's the office from Quartermaster, General Longstreet's Quartermaster Russell, December 27, 1863. The law requires that every person, no matter of what opinion, shall be left a sufficiency of forage for the use of his own family. Quartermasters and their agents must be careful not to deviate from this order that was signed by General Longstreet. But sometimes they did deviate. They took things that they weren't due. General Graves said one time he and two other soldiers from his company spent most of one day, here's a little needed food, needed that, spent most of one day digging in an Irish potato patch near his camp. And what did they get for their labor? They got 2 shriveled up Irish potatoes. He said many of the soldiers were barefoot. They had little clothes. Some did not even have blankets, sleeping on leaves and grass. As I told you, General Longstreet had his headquarters in Russell, in the building just across the street from the Thompson Brothers Garage. Charles Patchen now lives in that home. But the attack on Fort Sanders and Knoxville, those soldiers came here after that, lasted only 40 minutes. And the Confederates left 1,142 dead to death of 693. And the attack, of course, was taken. As I told you, my grandmother, Kate Livingston Caldwell, kept this diary before and during and after the Civil War. It has been copied and placed in the State Archives in Nashville, and a copy of it also is in the Morristown Hamblen Library. I'd like for you to go there and read it. Here I'm going to give you just a few notations out of that diary. On June the 20th, 1862, part of Taylor's regiment passed on the way to Knoxville. The next day, considerable cannonading about the Gap we distinctly heard. Much excitement in the country in regard to the bridges being burned about Bristol and some Yankee cavalry in Tennessee. Now, a order came from both the Federals and the Confederates to hang the bridge burners. And 2 of them were hanged near Greenville, up in the tree. And as the passing trains go by, people take sticks and get spotted. Those dead men, instead of go ready until they take them down. Now, the bridge burners were despised, of course. The bridge, the strawberry train across the Ocean River was burned 4 times during the Civil War. In November 1861, the steam company by the Federals to burn all the bridges between Bristol and Stevenson, Alabama, right through Knoxville. 9 bridges now. Washington used for 250 miles of roadway, and including the progress of men and supplies to the Army of Northern Virginia from Federal Army. On November 8th, they attempted to burn the bridge across London, but the bridge was saved by the vigilance and bravery of the watchman Edward Key. He was the sole guard. He fought 12 men. He killed 1 and wounded another. He was shot. He thought he was dying. So he said, they have killed me, but I have saved the bridge. That was a very important place before the Civil War in Morristown. They had a lot of springs there and a lot of